The night sky over Denver looked peaceful. Dr. Lisa Morgan walked through the quiet halls of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, checking on her patients. She had worked here for 12 years, and she loved every moment of it. The children called her Dr. Lisa, and she knew each of them by name. In room 304, 7-year-old Danny Harris was still awake. He sat up in his bed, looking at pictures of rockets and planets on his tablet. The leukemia had taken his hair and much of his strength, but it had not taken his dreams. "You should be sleeping, Danny," Lisa said gently. "I can't sleep, Dr. Lisa. I'm too excited. Tomorrow they're bringing that real astronaut to visit us." Danny's eyes were bright despite his pale face. Lisa smiled and sat on the edge of his bed. "Then you need to rest so you have energy tomorrow. Deal?" "Deal," Danny said, putting down his tablet. Lisa tucked him in and moved to the next room. There were 287 children in the hospital tonight. Some were recovering from surgeries. Others fought cancer like Danny. A few had rare diseases that required constant monitoring, but all of them were loved, and all of them were safe, or so everyone thought. High above Earth, Ambassador Richard Cooper floated in the observation deck of the Krell orbital station. He had been negotiating with the aliens for 3 months now. The talks were going well, or at least he thought so. The Krell were a powerful species, controlling dozens of star systems. Earth was new to the galactic community, and the Krell treated humans like children who needed guidance. Richard did not like their attitude, but he kept his opinions to himself. His job was to build bridges, not burn them. "Ambassador Cooper," said Krell Commander Zekthar, entering the room. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, with gray skin and 4 arms. "I trust you are comfortable?" "Very comfortable, thank you," Richard replied. "I believe we're close to finalizing the trade agreement." Yes, Zekthar said, waving one of his hands dismissively. "Your planet has interesting resources. We are willing to share some basic technology in exchange." Basic technology. Richard bit back his frustration. The Krell always made it sound like they were doing Earth a favor, but he nodded and smiled. That was diplomacy. On the Orbital Defense Station Sentinel, Admiral Jake Morrison reviewed fleet positions with his staff. Earth's defense fleet was small compared to other species, but it was growing. Jake had spent 30 years building it from nothing into something respectable. "Admiral, we're detecting movement in the Krell diplomatic fleet," said Lieutenant Commander Scott Palmer, looking at his screens. "What kind of movement?" Jake asked. "One of their warships is breaking formation. It's..." "Wait." Scott's face went pale. "Sir, it's powering weapons." "What?" Jake crossed to Scott's station in 3 quick steps. "That can't be right. Run diagnostics." "Diagnostics are clean, sir. That warship is definitely charging weapons and... Oh, God! It's targeting Denver." Jake's blood turned to ice. His sister lived in Denver. His niece Emma was in St. Mary's Children's Hospital, fighting a heart condition. "Get me a channel to that ship right now and scramble the defense fighters." But they were too late. Commander Zekthar smiled to himself as he left Ambassador Cooper. The human did not know what was about to happen. None of them did. The Krell High Command had decided that humanity needed a lesson. They were getting too confident, asking for too much in the negotiations. A demonstration of power would remind them of their place. Zekthar had chosen the target himself, a children's hospital. It was perfect. Soft, emotional, and completely defenseless. The humans would learn that the Krell could strike anywhere, anytime. And the fabricated evidence of weapons research was already prepared. The other galactic species would accept it. They always did. No one challenged the Krell. The warship Vengeance fired. Lisa was checking on a sleeping infant when the world turned to light. There was no sound at first. Just impossible brightness that filled every window. Then came the heat, a wave of burning air that turned everything to ash in a fraction of a second. Danny Harris never woke up. Neither did 286 other children. Dr. Lisa Morgan died protecting a child she was holding, though nothing could protect them from what came next. The entire city block simply ceased to exist. Where St. Mary's Children's Hospital had stood for 70 years, there was now only a crater of melted glass and twisted metal. On the Sentinel, Jake Morrison watched the mushroom cloud rise over Denver. His hands gripped the edge of the console so hard his knuckles turned white. The numbers on the screen showed the blast radius. St. Mary's was at ground zero. Emma was gone. All those children were gone. "Sir," Scott said quietly. "We're receiving a transmission from the Krell warship." "Put it on screen," Jake said. His voice was flat, empty. Commander Zekthar appeared on the display. "This is Commander Zekthar of the Krell Dominion. The facility known as St. Mary's Hospital was harboring illegal biological weapons research. We have executed a necessary preemptive strike to protect galactic security. This action was authorized under Galactic Security Protocol 7. We advise Earth government to comply with all future Krell inspections to avoid similar incidents." The transmission ended. Jake stared at the screen. Biological weapons research. In a children's hospital. It was a lie. An obvious, cruel lie. But it did not matter. The Krell had the power, and power made truth. "Admiral," said Captain Greg Norton, his second in command. "Orders, sir." Jake looked at the mushroom cloud still visible on the planet below. He thought of Emma, who loved to draw pictures of horses. He thought of all those children who would never grow up, never fall in love, never see the stars they dreamed about. "Stand down," he finally said. "We can't fight them. Not yet." Ambassador Richard Cooper received the news in his quarters on the Krell station. He sat down slowly, unable to process what he was hearing. The Krell had nuked a children's hospital. They were claiming it was justified, and they expected Earth to accept this. He walked to the window and looked down at his planet. Somewhere down there, hundreds of families were learning that their children were dead. Somewhere down there, the people who trusted him to keep them safe were asking why he had failed. Richard had spent his whole career believing in diplomacy, in finding peaceful solutions. But as he stood there looking at Earth, he wondered if some acts were beyond forgiveness. He wondered if some enemies could never be reasoned with. On Earth, President Helen Carter sat in the Situation Room surrounded by advisors. Everyone was talking at once, demanding action, asking questions, seeking answers that did not exist. She held up her hand for silence. "How many confirmed casualties?" she asked. 287 children, said General Paul Ross, plus 63 staff members, all dead instantly. Helen closed her eyes. She had 2 grandchildren. She tried to imagine what the parents of those children were feeling right now and could not. The pain was too great to comprehend. "What are our options?" she asked. "Diplomatically, we file a protest with the Galactic Council," said her C. The Galactic Council met 3 days after the Denver attack. Representatives from 47 different species gathered in the Great Chamber on Neutral Station Alpha Prime. Ambassador Richard Cooper stood before them, presenting Earth's case. "The Krell claim they destroyed a children's hospital because it housed biological weapons research," Richard said. His voice was steady, but his hands shook slightly. "This is a complete fabrication. St. Mary's Hospital had been operating for 70 years. Every piece of equipment, every supply, every visitor was logged and tracked. There were no weapons. There were only sick children." Krell Ambassador Threknall rose to speak. The massive alien looked down at Richard with something like amusement. "The humans are new to galactic affairs. They do not understand the threats we all face. Our intelligence was solid. The facility was a danger. We acted appropriately." "You murdered children," Richard said. "We eliminated a threat," Threknall replied calmly. "If humans choose to hide military assets in civilian locations, they must accept the consequences. This matter is closed. The council voted. 32 species sided with the Krell. 12 abstained. Only 3 voted with Earth. The Krell were too powerful to challenge. Their fleets protected too many trade routes. Their technology was too valuable. It was easier to believe their lies than to face the truth. Richard returned to Earth defeated. The galactic community had abandoned them. But not everyone was willing to accept defeat. Captain Nicole Hayes commanded the stealth ship Shadow Runner, humanity's most advanced reconnaissance vessel. She had listened to the council session from orbit, and she had made a decision. "We're going to the Krell home system," she told her crew. "Captain, that's suicide," said her first officer, Lieutenant Chris Wade. "Their defenses will tear us apart." "Not if they don't see us," Nicole said. "The Shadow Runner was built for exactly this kind of mission. We need proof of what really happened. We need to know if they're lying." "We already know they're lying," Chris said. "We know it. The Council needs to see it. Plot a course for Vectal Prime. We leave in 1 hour." The Shadow Runner slipped through space like a ghost. Its experimental cloaking system bent light and sensor waves around the hull, making it nearly invisible. Nicole had helped design the system herself before becoming a ship captain. Now she was betting her life and her crew's lives that it would work. They reached the Krell home system after 10 days of travel. Vectal Prime was a massive planet, home to 3 billion Krell. Dozens of warships patrolled the system, and defensive satellites covered every approach, but none of them saw the small Earth ship gliding past. "We're approaching their central data archive," said Lieutenant K. Foster at the scanning station. "It's heavily guarded." "Can you hack it?" Nicole asked. "If I can get close enough, yes. But we'll need to drop the cloak to make the connection. We'll be visible for at least 30 seconds. "Do it fast," Nicole said. "Chris, be ready to run if this goes wrong." The Shadow Runner drifted toward the archive station. At the last possible moment, Kay dropped the cloak and fired a data probe. The thin beam connected with the Krell network, and Kay's fingers flew across her controls. "I'm in," she said, "searching for files related to Earth and the Denver strike." Alarms began wailing on the Krell station. Ships started moving toward their position. "Faster, Kay," Nicole said calmly. "Got it. Downloading now. Holy hell. Captain, you need to see this." "Download it all and get us out of here," Nicole ordered. "Chris, full power to engines." The Shadow Runner jumped to faster-than-light speed, just as Krell missiles reached their position. They escaped, but barely. 2 days later, they were back in Earth orbit, and Nicole was sitting in the Oval Office with President Helen Carter. "Show me what you found," Helen said. Kay pulled up the files on the main display. There were internal Krell military communications, planning documents, and targeting analyses. The truth was laid out in cold clinical detail. The Krell High Command had chosen St. Mary's Hospital deliberately, not because it was a threat, but because it was not. They wanted to break human morale. They wanted to show Earth that resistance was pointless. The hospital was picked because it was full of the weakest, most vulnerable targets possible. There were even discussions about the psychological impact. Krell military psychologists had predicted that destroying a children's hospital would make humanity more compliant, more willing to accept Krell dominance without question. "They thought we would break," Helen said quietly. "They thought killing our children would make us submit." "They were wrong," Nicole said. Helen looked at the files for a long moment. Then she made a call. "Get me Dr. Alan Pierce. Tell him I need to know the status of the Aurora project immediately." Dr. Alan Pierce arrived at the White House within the hour. He was a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been working on classified projects for 20 years, but nothing like what he was about to discuss. "Madam President," he said, "the Aurora project has succeeded. We've built a working stellar converter." "Explain it to me in simple terms," Helen said. "We found technology in the Mars ruins 3 years ago. Ancient, incredibly advanced. We've been trying to understand it ever since. 2 months ago, we had a breakthrough. The device can destabilize a star's core, triggering a supernova, a weapon that destroys entire solar systems, Helen said. Yes, ma'am. It violates every treaty on weapons of mass destruction. The galactic community would condemn us for even building it. The galactic community just condemned 287 children to death and called it justice, Helen said sharply. Can we use it against the Krell home system? Alan hesitated. Technically, yes. But, Madam President, the Krell home system has 3 billion inhabitants. If we use this weapon, we become worse than they are. What if we give them time to evacuate? Helen asked. What if we broadcast a warning and give them 72 hours to leave the system before the star explodes? Alan blinked. That would give them time to save their civilians. But their military infrastructure, their shipyards, their command centers, everything in orbit would be destroyed. The Krell Dominion would collapse. Would it work? Yes. The device takes 72 hours to fully destabilize a star once activated. They would have time to evacuate if they moved quickly. Helen turned to Admiral Jake Morrison, who had been sitting quietly in the corner. Admiral, can we deliver this weapon to the Krell home system? Jake looked up. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. He had not stopped working since Emma died. Yes, Madam President. It would be a one-way mission. We would need to hold position around the device for those 72 hours to make sure the Krell cannot disable it. Most of my ships and crew would not make it back. But yes, we can do it. Then we have a choice to make, Helen said. She pressed a button on her desk. Get me the Security Council. Emergency session right now. The Security Council met in a secure bunker beneath Washington. The leaders of Earth's major nations gathered in person, their faces grim. Helen showed them the evidence from the Krell archives. She explained the Aurora project. She outlined the plan. The debate was fierce. Some argued that using such a weapon would make humanity into monsters. Others pointed out that doing nothing would mean accepting the murder of children as an acceptable price for galactic trade. Finally, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom spoke up. They killed our children to break our spirit. If we do nothing, they were right. We're nothing but frightened animals who will accept any abuse to survive. But if we strike back while giving their civilians a chance to live, we show the galaxy who we really are. We're not monsters. We're a species that will defend itself with absolute force, but will never lose its humanity in the process. The vote was unanimous. Earth would strike back. President Helen Carter made a brief public address. She did not mention the Aurora project or the specific plan. She simply said that justice would be served and that humanity would never bow to those who murdered children. In orbit, Admiral Jake Morrison began assembling his strike force. He called for volunteers, knowing it was likely a suicide mission. Every single member of the Defense Fleet volunteered. He had to turn people away. Commander Ben Walsh of Special Operations would lead the ground team. Our Commander Ben Walsh stood in the briefing room aboard the carrier Independence, looking at the faces of his strike team. 24 men and women, all volunteers, all knowing they probably would not come home. They ranged from experienced combat veterans to young engineers barely out of training. What united them was loss. Every single person in this room had lost someone in the Denver attack. We have 60 days to prepare for the most important military operation in human history, Ben said. His voice was calm and steady. In 60 days, we will jump into the Krell home system. We will deploy the stellar converter into their sun. We will broadcast evacuation warnings to give their civilians time to escape, and we will hold the line for 72 hours while the star destabilizes. Questions? Lieutenant Kate Sullivan raised her hand. She was a fighter pilot, one of the best in the fleet. Her daughter Claire had been 5 years old when she died at St. Mary's. Commander, what happens if the Krell try to evacuate their military leadership along with the civilians? Then they evacuate their military leadership, Ben said. We're not assassins. We're destroying their military infrastructure, not hunting individuals. If Krell commanders escape on civilian transports, that's acceptable. Even Zekthar? Kate asked. Even the one who gave the order? Ben was quiet for a moment. Even him. We're doing this to protect humanity, not for revenge. If we start choosing who lives and dies based on personal hatred, we become exactly what they think we are. Kate nodded slowly. She did not like it, but she understood. Sergeant Ryan Brooks spoke up next. He was a weapons specialist, built like a tank and twice as tough. His nephew had been in St. Mary's for a routine surgery when the Krell missile hit. What are the odds we make it back, Commander? Honestly, less than 10%. The Krell home fleet numbers over 500 warships. We'll have 12 ships. We're counting on surprise and desperation to get the device deployed. After that, we just need to survive long enough for it to activate. Good enough for me, Ryan said. When do we start training? Over the next 60 days, the strike team trained harder than any military unit in human history. They ran combat simulations, practiced equipment deployments, and studied Krell tactics until they could predict enemy movements in their sleep. Captain Nicole Hayes made 3 more trips to the Krell system in the Shadowrunner, each time gathering more intelligence. She mapped out every defensive satellite, every patrol route, every weak point in their security. The Krell never detected her ship. They were too confident in their superiority to imagine a human vessel could penetrate their defenses. On her 3rd trip, Nicole observed Commander Zekthar giving a speech at a military academy. He stood before thousands of young Krell warriors, telling them how he had broken human morale with a single strike. He called it the perfect demonstration of Krell superiority. Nicole recorded every word. She would make sure Admiral Morrison heard it before they jumped to Vectal Prime. Dr. Alan Pierce worked around the clock with his team, preparing the stellar converter for deployment. The device was smaller than most people expected, about the size of a cargo container. But the power it contained was enough to destroy a solar system. The converter works by injecting exotic matter into the star's core, Alan explained to Ben during a technical briefing. This destabilizes the fusion process. The star begins to collapse, then rebounds in a massive explosion. The process takes 72 hours from activation to detonation. There's no way to stop it once started. What if the Krell try to remove it from the sun? Ben asked. The device will be traveling through the star's corona at over 1 million degrees. Any ship that gets close enough to retrieve it will be destroyed by the heat. The Krell would need to build specialized equipment to reach it, and they won't have time. Good, Ben said. We need to be absolutely certain this works. Alan looked uncomfortable. Commander, I have to ask. Are you sure about giving them the evacuation warning? If we just activated the device and left, they'd never know what hit them. 3 billion Krell would die before they realized what was happening. And then we'd be murderers, Ben said. No different from Zekthar. We're not doing this to kill civilians, Doctor. We're doing this to break their military power and show the galaxy that humanity fights with honor. The warning stays in the plan. While the military prepared, President Helen Carter worked on the political side of the operation. She met with leaders from the few alien species that had supported Earth in the Galactic Council. She needed them to understand what was about to happen and why. Ambassador Richard Cooper delivered the message in secret meetings throughout the galaxy. Some species were horrified by the plan. Others understood. A few quietly promised that when the time came, they would offer humanitarian aid to evacuating Krell civilians. You realize this will change everything, said Ambassador Thelcor of the Vex Collective during one meeting. If you succeed, the entire galactic order will shift. The Krell have been a dominant power for centuries. Then maybe it's time for a new order, Richard said. One where you can't murder children and call it justice. Back on the Independence, Admiral Jake Morrison reviewed the final battle plans with his fleet commanders. 12 ships would make the jump. The Independence would serve as the command vessel. The Shadowrunner would guide them in and deploy the stellar converter. The remaining 10 ships were a mix of destroyers and frigates built for speed and firepower. "We won't be able to match the Krell fleet in a straight fight," Jake said. "Our only advantage is surprise. They've never seen us as a serious threat. That ends the moment we arrive. Once we deploy the converter, our only job is to keep the Krell away from it. For 72 hours, we hold the line, no matter the cost." Captain Steve Gray of the destroyer Valiant spoke up. "Admiral, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "My crew and I have been talking. We know this is likely a one-way trip. We just want you to know that we're ready. What the Krell did, that can never be allowed to stand. If we have to die to set things right, then that's what we'll do." Jake looked around the room at the other commanders. He saw the same determination on every face. These people were not going into battle out of hatred or revenge. They were going because someone had to stand up and say that murdering children was wrong, even if it cost everything. "I'm honored to serve with all of you," Jake said quietly. As the 60 days came to an end, the families of the strike force said their goodbyes. Kate Sullivan recorded a video message for her surviving son, Andrew, who was living with his father. She tried to explain why she had to do this, why she could not just stay home and mourn Claire. "I'm doing this so you can grow up in a world where people face consequences for evil actions," she said to the camera. "I'm doing this so no other parent has to lose a child the way I lost your sister. I love you, Andrew. Be strong." Ryan Brooks went home to Ohio to visit his parents. They knew where he was going and what it meant. His mother cried and begged him not to go. His father, a veteran of Earth's early space conflicts, shook his hand and told him to make it count. Ben Walsh spent his final night before deployment standing in the observation deck of the Independence, looking down at Earth. He thought about all the things he would miss: morning coffee, the sound of rain, the feeling of grass under his feet, small things that meant everything. But he also thought about Emma Morrison, Jake's niece, about Danny Harris with his dreams of becoming an astronaut, about 287 children who would never grow up. And he knew that what he was about to do was right. On Earth, a memorial service was held at the crater where St. Mary's Hospital had stood. Thousands gathered to remember the children. President Carter gave a speech, though she could not tell the crowd what was about to happen. "We will never forget them," Helen said, "and we will never accept that their deaths were justified. Justice is coming. I promise you that." The crowd did not know what she meant, but they would, soon enough. In the Krell home system, life continued normally. Ships came and went from Vectal Prime. The military conducted routine patrols. Politicians debated trade policy and territorial expansion. Commander Zekthar planned his next career move, hoping for a position on the high command. None of them knew that humanity was coming. On the 60th day, Admiral Jake Morrison addressed his fleet one final time. "In 12 hours, we jump to the Krell home system. We will show them that humanity cannot be broken. We will show the galaxy that we fight with honor, but without mercy, for those who target our children. Whatever happens in the next 72 hours, we do this together. For Earth, for those we've lost, for the future of every child who comes after us." The fleet crews stood at attention, their faces set with determination. They were ready. Ben Walsh made one final check of the stellar converter. Everything was, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Vectal system. For a moment, everything was silent. The Krell home world hung in space ahead of them, a blue and green planet 3 times the size of Earth. Hundreds of ships moved through the system on routine patrols and trade runs. Defensive satellites covered every major approach route. None of them expected an attack. No one had ever been foolish enough to attack the Krell home system. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison." Jake's voice came through every speaker in the fleet. "Execute Operation Reckoning for our children." For our children, 1,000 voices echoed back. The Independence and its escorts burned forward at maximum speed. Alarms began wailing across every Krell military installation in the system. Automated defenses activated. Patrol ships changed course to intercept. But the humans had a head start, and they were using it. Captain Nicole Hayes pushed the Shadow Runner to its limits. The small ship raced ahead of the main fleet, carrying the stellar converter toward Vectal Prime's sun. Behind her, the Independence and its escorts engaged the first wave of Krell defenders. "Multiple contacts closing fast," said Lieutenant Chris Wade at the tactical station. 20 Krell interceptors, range decreasing. "Keep us on course," Nicole said. "We don't have time to fight. We just need to reach the sun." The Independence opened fire, its rail guns sending streams of superheated metal toward the Krell ships. The destroyer Valiant moved to intercept the enemy interceptors, drawing fire away from the Shadow Runner. Captain Steve Gray's voice came across the fleet channel. "Shadow Runner is clear. We'll hold them here. Go, go, go!" The Valiant's shields flared as Krell weapons struck home. Steve kept his ship between the enemy and Nicole's vessel, trading his shields for time. When a Krell missile finally broke through and tore into the Valiant's engine section, Steve ordered his crew to the escape pods. Then he aimed his dying ship at the closest Krell cruiser and hit maximum thrust. The Valiant struck the enemy ship like a meteor, both vessels exploding in a ball of fire and debris. Steve Gray died in the blast, but he had bought Nicole 5 precious minutes. On the Independence, Admiral Jake Morrison watched the tactical display as more Krell ships converged on their position. The odds were getting worse by the second, but the Shadow Runner was almost at the sun. "All fighters launch," Jake ordered. "Kate, you're up." Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's fighter squadron screamed out of the Independence's launch bays. 24 human fighters against a sky full of Krell interceptors. The odds did not matter. All that mattered was keeping the enemy away from the Shadow Runner. Kate's targeting computer locked onto a Krell fighter. She fired, and the enemy ship exploded. Another target appeared, and she fired again. Around her, her squadron mates fought with desperate efficiency. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, but they were fighting for their children. "This is Kate to all fighters. Stay tight. Watch each other's backs. We don't need to win. We just need to buy time." The Shadow Runner reached the sun's outer corona. The temperature outside the hull climbed to thousands of degrees. Nicole's hands were steady on the controls as she navigated through solar flares and magnetic storms. "Opening cargo bay," she said. "Ben, you're up." In the cargo bay, Commander Ben Walsh and his team secured the stellar converter to its delivery vehicle. It was a simple rocket, designed to dive deep into the sun's core where the converter would begin its work. "Converter is ready," Ben reported. "Launching in 3, 2, 1. The rocket fired, carrying the device into the sun's burning heart. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Dr. Alan Pierce's voice came through from Earth. "Converter is active. Stellar destabilization has begun. Time to supernova, 72 hours. Admiral Morrison transmitted on all frequencies, broadcasting to every ship and station in the system. His voice was hard as steel. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet. 60 days ago, your military murdered 287 children in an unprovoked nuclear strike. You called it necessary. You called it justified. Today, humanity responds. We have deployed a stellar converter into your sun. In 72 hours, this star will go supernova. Your military infrastructure will be destroyed. Your fleet will be scattered, your dominion will fall, but we are not you. We give you this warning. Evacuate your civilians. You have time to save them. We will not murder your innocent as you murdered ours. But your military ends today." For a moment, there was silence across the entire system. Then chaos erupted. On Vectal Prime, the Krell High Command scrambled to respond. Half of them thought it was a bluff. The other half began screaming orders to verify the threat. Within minutes, their scientists confirmed the worst. The sun was destabilizing. The humans had really done it. Emergency broadcasts went out across all Krell worlds. Civilian evacuation protocols activated. Ships began launching from every spaceport on the planet, carrying refugees toward the outer system. Other species, hearing Earth's broadcast, sent their own ships to help with the evacuation. But the Krell military had a different priority. Fleet Admiral Kravok gave the order that would doom thousands of his own people. Ignore the evacuation. Every available warship is to destroy that human fleet and disable the converter. Kill them all. Over 300 Krell warships turned toward the human position near the sun. The battle that followed would be remembered for centuries. The Independence took hits from a dozen different directions. Its shields failed. Its armor began to fail. But Jake Morrison kept his ship between the enemy and the Shadow Runner, which was now positioned to defend the converter. "All power to forward guns," Jake ordered. "We're not going anywhere. Hold this position." The destroyer Thunder exploded, taking 2 Krell cruisers with it. The frigate Dawn's Light rammed a Krell dreadnought, buying time for the carrier to reload its fighters. Human ships were dying, but they were selling themselves dearly. Kate Sullivan's fighter took a hit that tore off half her wing. She kept flying on emergency thrusters, lining up one more shot. She destroyed a Krell bomber that was heading toward the Shadow Runner, then her fighter finally gave out. She ejected seconds before it exploded. "This is Kate Sullivan," she transmitted as her pod tumbled through space. "Got one more for Claire. Worth it." Sergeant Ryan Brooks manned one of the Independence's gun batteries. His station was hit by enemy fire, and half his crew died instantly. Ryan kept firing with his one working gun, his hands bleeding, his face burned. He killed 4 more Krell fighters before the battery exploded around him. On the Shadow Runner, Nicole Hayes watched the battle with tears in her eyes. So many people dying to protect her ship. She could not let it be for nothing. "Chris, divert all power to shields. We're not moving from this spot until those 72 hours are up." The Krell threw everything they had at the human position. Wave after wave of fighters, missiles by the hundreds, energy beams that could melt through ship hulls. But the humans did not break. Every time a ship fell, the others closed ranks. Every time a fighter exploded, another pilot took its place. Commander Ben Walsh's team repelled 3 Krell boarding attempts on the Shadow Runner. The aliens were trying to capture the ship and use it to reach the converter. Ben and his people fought them in the corridors with rifles and grenades, dying one by one to keep the enemy back. "This is Ben Walsh," he gasped into his communicator, blood running down his face. "Krell boarding teams repelled. We're holding." The Independence's bridge took a direct hit. Half the command crew died. Admiral Jake Morrison's left arm was broken, and he had burns across his chest. But he stayed in his command chair, giving orders, keeping the fleet together. "Do not break formation," he ordered. "Do not retreat. We hold until the timer runs out. That's an order." By the 24-hour mark, the human fleet was down to 5 ships. By 48 hours, only 2 remained. The Independence and the Shadow Runner. The Independence was more wreck than ship, held together by emergency power and determination. Kate Sullivan's rescue pod was picked up by a Krell ship. She expected to be killed. Instead, the Krell captain looked at her with something like respect. "Why?" the captain asked. "Why warn us? You could have killed us all." "Because we're better than you," Kate said. "Because we won't become monsters just to fight monsters." On Vectal Prime, the evacuation continued. Millions of Krell civilians fled the system, aided by ships from a dozen other species. They watched human and Krell forces still fighting near the sun and could not understand why humans would sacrifice so much. On Earth, President Helen Carter gave a live address to humanity and the galaxy. "We did not want this war. We begged for peace. We asked for justice through legal means. But when justice was denied, when our children's murders were called acceptable, we had no choice but to act. Today, our fleet fights not for conquest or revenge, but for a simple principle. Those who murder children must face consequences. We gave the Krell civilians a chance to live. We hope they take it. But their military's reign of terror ends today. At the 60-hour mark, Admiral Jake Morrison's ship finally died. Too many hits, too much damage. The Independence's reactor went critical, and Jake had just enough time to evacuate the remaining crew before it exploded. The Shadowrunner was alone now, battered and burning, but still protecting the converter. Nicole Hayes and her small crew faced down the remaining Krell fleet by themselves. They had 12 hours left to hold. Commander Zekthar himself led the final assault. He wanted to be the one to stop the humans, to prove that his actions in Denver had been right. His flagship drove toward the Shadowrunner, weapons blazing. Ben Walsh, wounded and exhausted, made a decision. He strapped the rescue ships arrived 3 days after the supernova. They found the Shadowrunner drifting in space, its engines dead, but its hull intact. Inside, Captain Nicole Hayes and 2 of her crew were barely alive. Commander Ben Walsh was gone. Sergeant Ryan Brooks was gone. Most of the strike force was gone. But they had won. The Krell Dominion collapsed within weeks. Their military infrastructure was destroyed. Their fleet was scattered across a dozen systems, leaderless and broken. The civilians they had evacuated became refugees, dependent on the charity of other species. The survivors numbered in the billions, saved by the warning that humanity had given them. Every Krell who lived through the supernova knew they were alive because humans had chosen mercy over revenge. On Earth, the news of the battle's outcome spread like wildfire. People gathered in the streets, crying and cheering at the same time. The children of St. Mary's had been avenged. The Krell would never threaten anyone again. But the price had been terrible. Thousands of human military personnel had died in the operation. Admiral Jake Morrison's body was never recovered. Commander Ben Walsh died a hero. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan was rescued by the Krell, but would spend months recovering from her injuries. President Helen Carter gave a speech from the memorial site where St. Mary's Hospital once stood. The crowd that gathered numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Our people gave their lives not for conquest, not for revenge, but for justice, Helen said. They showed the galaxy that humanity will defend itself with absolute force. But we will never lose our humanity in the process. We could have killed billions. We chose to save them instead. That is who we are. That is what we will always be. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. The mood was tense. Earth had just destroyed one of the major galactic powers. Many species were afraid of what humanity might do next. Ambassador Richard Cooper stood before the council once more. This time, no one laughed at him. No one dismissed his words. Earth did not seek this conflict, Richard said. We exhausted every diplomatic option. We brought evidence of Krell war crimes to this council, and you ignored us. You told us to accept the murder of our children as the price of galactic citizenship. We refused. We struck back with overwhelming force, but we did so with honor. We gave the Krell civilians time to evacuate. We could have committed genocide. We chose mercy instead. Now I ask this council, will you continue to ignore injustice when it is convenient? Or will you stand for the principle that some actions, like the murder of children, can never be acceptable? The debate lasted for hours. Finally, the council voted to establish new protocols for addressing war crimes and attacks on civilians. It was not perfect, but it was progress. The galaxy had learned that it could no longer hide behind convenient lies when the powerful committed atrocities. In the ruins of the Krell home system, salvage operations continued for months. Teams from many different species worked to recover anything of value from the destroyed orbital structures. They also worked to identify and recover the dead. Among the wreckage of the Independence, they found Admiral Jake Morrison's personal log. His final entry, recorded minutes before his ship exploded, was broadcast across the galaxy. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison. If you're hearing this, I'm dead, and the mission succeeded. I want everyone to know that my crew died with honor. We did not die for revenge. We died because someone had to stand up and say that murdering children is wrong, no matter how powerful you are. We died so that no other species will have to watch their children burn and be told it was acceptable. We died so that humanity can hold its head high among the stars. I regret nothing. Tell my sister I love her. Tell Emma I'm sorry I couldn't save her. But tell them both that her death was not in vain." The recording made Jake a legend across the galaxy. Monuments to him appeared on dozens of worlds. The humans called him a hero. Even some Krell, ashamed of what their government had done, honored his memory. The Krell refugees struggled to find a place in the new galaxy. Most species welcomed them with caution, offering humanitarian aid, but watching carefully for any signs of their old military ambitions. The Krell civilians, forced to confront what their government had done, split into factions. Some still believed the attack on Denver was justified. Others, especially those who had been saved by the evacuation warning, began to question everything they had been taught about their superiority. A year after the battle, a delegation of Krell civilians came to Earth. They asked permission to visit the memorial at St. Mary's. President Carter, after much debate, allowed it. The Krell stood before the black stone wall where 287 names were carved. They looked at the names of the children their government had murdered. They looked at the names of the humans who died stopping them. Many of the Krell wept. Their leader, a civilian administrator named Veltora, spoke to the gathered crowd. "There are no words that can excuse what was done here. Our government murdered innocents to prove a point. They thought you would break. They thought killing your weakest would make you submit. They were wrong. You proved that a species that values its children above its own safety is the strongest species of all. Some of my people saved by your warning have asked me to deliver a message. They want to honor those who died here. They want to help build something better." The Krell volunteers began working at the new children's hospital that was being built on the memorial site. They worked alongside humans, trying in small ways to atone for the crimes of their government. It did not erase what happened, but it was a start. Captain Nicole Hayes spent 6 months in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. When she was finally released, she returned to the memorial. She stood before the wall of names, running her fingers over the carved letters. She found Danny Harris's name and remembered the boy who dreamed of being an astronaut. She found Claire Sullivan's name and thought of Kate, who was still recovering in a different hospital. She found the names of Ben Walsh and Ryan Brooks and Steve Gray and so many others who had given everything. "We did it," Nicole whispered. "We made them pay. But more than that, we showed them who we are. We're not monsters. We're not conquerors. We're just people who love our children enough to fight back when someone tries to hurt them." A voice spoke behind her. "Captain Hayes?" Nicole turned. A young Krell female stood there, barely an adult. She looked nervous. "I wanted to thank you," the Krell said. "My family was on Vectal Prime when the warning came. We evacuated with minutes to spare. Your people saved us even though our government murdered your children. I don't understand why." "Because we're better than your government was," Nicole said. "Because we fight for justice, not revenge. Because even in our darkest hour, we refused to become what we were fighting against." The young Krell nodded slowly. "I'm studying to become a doctor. I want to work here, at the new hospital if they'll have me. I want to honor those who died by healing others." Nicole looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I think they'd like that." 5 years after the battle, the memorial was complete. The new St. Mary's Children's Hospital stood next to it, a symbol of hope rising from tragedy. The black stone wall bore the names of every human who died in the Denver attack and the retaliatory strike. At the center of the memorial stood a statue showing Admiral Jake Morrison standing with Commander Ben Walsh, Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, and Sergeant Ryan Brooks. They looked toward the stars with determination on their faces. The inscription at the base read, "They fought not because they loved war, but because they loved their children more than they feared death." President Helen Carter, now in her final year in office, attended the memorial's dedication ceremony. She stood at the podium, looking out at the massive crowd. 5 years ago, we faced a choice. We could accept injustice to preserve peace, or we could fight back and risk everything. Our military chose to fight. They showed the galaxy that humanity cannot be pushed beyond a certain point. They showed that we value life, even enemy life, but we will not tolerate the murder of innocents. Today, we honor their sacrifice. Today, we promise that their deaths meant something. In the crowd, Kate Sullivan stood with her son Andrew. He was 12 now, old enough to understand what his mother had done. Kate's injuries had ended her military career, but she now trained new fighter pilots, teaching them not just how to fight, but why they fought. "Did you really do all those things they say?" Andrew asked. "I did what I had to do," Kate said. "For Claire, for all the children who died, for you, so you could grow up in a galaxy where people face consequences for evil actions. Do you regret it?" Kate thought about the pain, the nightmares, the friends she lost. She thought about the moments in her fighter when she was sure she would die. Then she thought about Claire's laugh, about Danny's dreams, about all the children who never got to grow up. "No," she said, "I don't regret it." The galaxy had changed. The Krell Dominion was gone, replaced by smaller democratic governments among the Krell refugees. Other species that once relied on military might to enforce their will had reconsidered their approaches. Earth's influence grew not through conquest, but through the moral authority it had earned. But humanity never forgot the price of that authority. Every year, on the anniversary of the Denver attack, people gathered at memorials across Earth and its colonies. They read the names of the fallen. They remembered what had been lost and what had been won. And in the halls of power throughout the galaxy, leaders looked at the name Earth with a new understanding. Humans were not the most technologically advanced species. They were not the most numerous, but they were the species that would burn down the sky itself to protect their children, and they would do it without losing their souls in the process. That made them more dangerous than any warship. That made them someone you never wanted as an enemy. And above all, that made them someone you could trust to do the right thing, even when the right thing cost everything. Nicole Hayes, now promoted to Admiral, stood in her office on the orbital defense station that had replaced the destroyed Sentinel. She looked down at Earth, at the blue and green world that had produced people capable of both terrible violence and extraordinary mercy. On her desk sat a photo taken before the mission. It showed the entire strike force together, smiling despite knowing what awaited them. Most of those faces were dead now, but their sacrifice had created a better galaxy. "We remember," Nicole said softly, touching the photo. "We protect. We never forget." Those words had become humanity's promise to the stars, a promise that they would defend the innocent, a promise that they would face any threat, no matter the odds, and a promise that they would do it all without becoming the monsters they fought. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson 5 years ago in the ruins of the Vectal system. They had learned that humanity was not weak. They had learned that attacking human children was the worst mistake anyone could make. But most importantly, they had learned that the species willing to sacrifice everything to protect their young while still showing mercy to their enemies was the most dangerous and the most noble species of all. The sun set over Denver, casting golden light across the memorial. Children played in the park nearby, their laughter rising into the evening air. They were safe, they were protected, and they lived in a galaxy where justice, bought with blood and sacrifice, still meant something. That was what the strike force had died for. That was why their names would be remembered forever. The end. PD on a suit and spacewalked out of the Shadow Runner with the last working demolition charge. As Krell fighters closed in, he activated his maneuvering jets and flew straight at Zekthar's flagship. "This is for Emma Morrison," he whispered. "For Danny Harris. For Claire Sullivan. For every child you murdered." He attached the charge to the flagship's hull and detonated it. The explosion tore through the ship's bridge. Commander Zekthar died instantly, his body blown into space. Ben Walsh died with him, but he died knowing he had stopped the one who ordered the Denver attack. The Krell fleet, seeing their commander dead and time running out, finally broke off. They fled the system with the civilian evacuees. The battle was over. Nicole Hayes sat in the Shadow Runner's damaged bridge, bleeding from a dozen wounds, and watched the timer count down. 10 minutes. 5. 1. The sun exploded. Vectal Prime's star erupted in a supernova that lit up the entire sector. The blast wave destroyed everything within the inner system. Krell shipyards, orbital stations, military academies, all gone in seconds. But the civilian evacuation ships, already past the safe distance, survived. Nicole closed her eyes as the shock wave hit. The Shadow Runner's shields held, barely. Then everything went dark. Perfect. The device was secured in the Shadow Runner's cargo bay, ready for deployment. He ran his hand along its smooth surface and whispered, "This is for Emma and Danny and Claire and all the others. This is for every child who died because you thought we were weak." Kate Sullivan sat in her fighter cockpit, running pre-flight checks. Her hands were steady on the controls. She thought about Claire's laugh, the way her daughter had always wanted to hear one more bedtime story. She thought about how Claire would never hear another story, never laugh again, never grow up to have children of her own. "This is for you, baby girl," Kate whispered. "Mommy's going to make sure they pay for what they did." The countdown began. 12 ships prepared to jump across hundreds of light years. Thousands of crew members made peace with the fact that they might not survive the next 3 days. But none of them hesitated. None of them backed down. At 0, the fleet jumped. They vanished from Earth orbit in flashes of light, racing toward the Krell home system at faster than light speeds. The journey would take 10 hours. When they arrived, the galaxy would change forever. Responsible for deploying and protecting the device, Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, whose daughter had died at St. Mary's, insisted on joining the mission. Sergeant Ryan Brooks, who had lost his nephew, signed up immediately. The Shadow Runner would guide them in, with Captain Nicole Hayes at the helm. She knew the Krell system better than anyone now. They had 60 days to prepare. 60 days to plan the destruction of one of the galaxy's major powers. 60 days to prove that humanity could not be broken. The Krell remained confident. Their intelligence detected increased Earth military activity, but they dismissed it as pointless posturing. Commander Zekthar was promoted for his successful Denver operation. He gave interviews to galactic media, explaining how primitive species needed firm guidance. He never imagined that the humans were coming for him. Chief of Staff. "Militarily? Nothing. The Krell fleet could destroy us in days." Helen opened her eyes. "Then we find a third option. Get me everything we have on Krell military positions, their home system, their weaknesses, and find out if the Aurora Project has made any progress. Madam President, the Aurora Project is experimental. The weapon violates every treaty we've signed." "A children's hospital," Helen said quietly, "also violated every treaty ever written. Get me the information." "We will not let this stand." The day everything changed had arrived. Humanity would never be the same.